My name is Brennan. I'm 31 years old, and I used to believe that if you were patient enough, if you were good enough, eventually the people who were supposed to love you would finally see you. I was wrong about that for a very long time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to a Saturday morning in late September, about 3 years ago now. The kind of morning where the light comes through hotel curtains in long gold strips, and everything smells like possibility and laundered linen, and whatever expensive candle the hotel had burning in the hallway. I was standing in front of a full-length mirror in Suite 308 of the Lakeview Grand in Kingston, Ontario, in a navy blue suit I had agonized over for almost a month. My best man, Theo, was behind me trying to get his cufflinks sorted out and swearing quietly every few seconds. Someone had ordered room service, scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, a pot of coffee, and it was sitting mostly untouched on the cart by the window because none of us could actually bring ourselves to eat. I was getting married in 4 hours. Her name was Priya. Is Priya. She's my wife now, and I want you to understand something about her before this story goes anywhere. She is the most grounded, quietly strong person I have ever met in my life. We'd been together for 7 years. Met at a graduate program orientation at Queen's University, two people who both showed up 12 minutes early and ended up standing awkwardly by the same coffee table. She laughed at something I said that wasn't even that funny, and I thought, okay, this one. 6 months later, we were inseparable. For years after that, I proposed on a rainy Tuesday evening in our apartment kitchen because I couldn't wait for the right moment anymore. She said yes before I'd even finished the sentence. So that's who I was getting married to. That's what the day was supposed to be. And it was mostly. It really was. Except for one moment. One exchange, maybe 90 seconds long, that I have replayed in my head more times than I can count. I need to tell you about my father first, though. Because without understanding him, none of what happened that morning will make any sense. His name is Gerald. Jerry, to people who've known him long enough. He's 63 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a room without trying, or maybe he does try, actually. Maybe I've just been watching him long enough that it looks effortless. He grew up in a small town outside of Sudbury, worked his way through a business degree, built a mid-sized contracting company from essentially nothing, and has reminded us of that fact at every major family gathering since approximately 1998. He's not a bad man. I want to be clear about that, because this story isn't about a villain. It's about something quieter and in some ways harder to name, a kind of love that has conditions attached to it that nobody ever wrote down, but everyone in the family understood. My mother, Diane, has always been softer. Warmer. She laughs easily and cries at commercials and makes soup when anyone is sick. I love her. But she has spent 40 years smoothing things over, and after a while that becomes its own kind of problem. Then there's my sister, Natalie. Natalie is 28. 3 years younger than me. She's sharp and funny and genuinely talented, I mean that. She's a graphic designer, and she's really good at it. But Natalie has always been my father's person. From the time she was about 7 years old and figured out that making Dad laugh was the fastest route to anything she wanted, she had him completely wrapped. It was never malicious, I don't think. It was just the way things were. Dad coached her soccer team. Dad drove 4 hours to her university art show. Dad flew to Vancouver for her portfolio launch and posted about it on Facebook 17 times. When Natalie got a promotion at her firm last spring, he took the whole family to dinner at a steakhouse and gave a toast. For me, I don't know. It was different. It was always just slightly different. I graduated with honors from a mechanical engineering program. Dad shook my hand at the ceremony and said, "Good. Now find something stable." When I got my first real engineering job, he said, "Just make sure you're saving." When I bought my first apartment, my own apartment, by myself at 26, he came to see it once, looked around, said the ceilings were low, and left. I stopped expecting the big reactions after a while. I told myself it was just how he was. That he wasn't a demonstrative person. But then I'd watch him with Natalie, and I'd have to find another explanation. It wasn't that he wasn't demonstrative. He just wasn't demonstrative with me. I don't know when I fully accepted that. Somewhere in my mid-20s, I think. You reach a point where the ache of wanting something that isn't coming starts to feel more exhausting than the thing itself, and you just quietly adjust. You lower the ceiling on what you expect. You stop holding your breath before family events. You train yourself not to notice. Or you try to anyway. Priya and I planned our wedding ourselves. Both of us. That was important to us. We wanted it to feel like ours, not a performance for anyone else. We found the venue, handled the catering, spent 3 weekends doing floral consultations because Priya has opinions about flowers that I deeply respect even if I couldn't tell a peony from a carnation. My parents contributed financially, which I was genuinely grateful for. My father wrote the check without complaint, and that meant something. My mother got emotional at every planning conversation and kept calling to suggest additions we'd already decided against, which was annoying but also kind of sweet. It felt, for a while, like this might be a moment that brought everyone together in the way you always hope it will. Natalie was involved too. Priya asked her to do some of the design work for the invitations, and Natalie knocked it out of the park. They actually got along well. Still do. Whatever the dynamic is between me and my father, Priya and Natalie have always been genuinely warm with each other. About 6 weeks before the wedding, my mother called me. "Your father wants to give a speech," she said. I felt something loosen in my chest. Something I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice casual. That would be great." "He's been working on it," she said. "He won't show me, but I can hear him practicing sometimes when he thinks the house is empty." I didn't let myself make it a big thing. I just said that was great, and I'd let the MC know to add him to the order of speakers, and I moved on. But the truth is, for 6 weeks, that little piece of information sat somewhere warm in the back of my mind. My father. Practicing a speech. For my wedding. Maybe things were going to be different. Maybe this was the moment. I know how that sounds, reading it back. So, Suite 308. The gold light. The untouched eggs. Theo had finally won the battle with his cufflinks. 2 of our university friends, Marcus and Dev, were sitting on the couch arguing about whether the Leafs had a real shot this season, which is a conversation that has been happening in this country since before I was born. Everything felt good. Everything felt right. My phone buzzed. My mother. "Dad's on his way up. Just warning you." I frowned at that. Just warning you, but I texted back a thumbs up and told Theo my dad was coming. There was a knock at the door about 4 minutes later. My father walked in looking the way my father always looks, pressed shirt, watch he's had since the 90s, that particular expression he carries that isn't quite a smile, but isn't unfriendly either. He shook hands with Theo, nodded at Marcus and Dev, and then looked at me. "You look good," he said. High praise, honestly, by Gerald's standards. "Thanks, Dad." The guys, reading the room, drifted toward the other side of the suite with their coffee cups. My father sat down on the edge of the armchair near the window. I sat across from him on the ottoman because it seemed weird to stand. The city was below us. Church bells somewhere in the distance, not ours, just the neighborhood. He asked about the timeline. I told him. He asked about parking at the venue, and I said it was handled. He nodded. There was a pause that wasn't quite comfortable. Then he said, "I've been thinking about the speech." And I felt it again, that same warmth from 6 weeks ago. "Yeah," I said. "Mom mentioned you'd been working on something." He shifted in the chair, looked at his watch, then back at me. "I've decided I'm not going to give one today." The warmth went out like someone had flipped a switch. I kept my face still. I have a lot of practice keeping my face still. "Oh," I said. "Okay." He nodded, like we'd just agreed on something practical. "I've been thinking about it, and Natalie's going to get married someday. Probably sooner than later the way things are going with that boyfriend of hers." He paused. "I want to save it for then. Her wedding is going to be, I just think it'll matter more. To have something really prepared. You know." He said it so plainly. Like it was a scheduling decision. Like he was telling me he'd moved a dentist appointment. Her wedding is going to matter more. Theo was on the other side of the room, and I could feel, without looking, that he had heard. Marcus and Dev had gone very still. The room had a particular quality of silence that happens when everyone present realizes something significant has occurred and nobody knows what to do with it. I looked at my father. 63 years old. Pressed shirt. Old watch. Sure, Dad, I said. That makes sense. He seemed relieved. Actually relieved. Like he'd been carrying that around and needed to set it down. He stood up, straightened his jacket, squeezed my shoulder once, and said, "All right. It's a big day. Don't be nervous." And then he walked back out of the suite. The door clicked shut. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Theo said, quietly, "Bren." "Don't," I said. "I'm just..." "Theo. I know. Don't." He didn't push it. That's why he's my best man. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city for about 30 seconds. Let myself feel it. Actually let myself feel the whole shape of what had just been said to me on my wedding morning, 3 hours before I was supposed to walk down an aisle. And then I put it away. Not because it didn't hurt, it did, more than I was going to let anyone see. But because Priya deserved a groom who was present. She deserved the whole day. And I was not going to let my father's 30-year pattern of quiet favoritism take even 1 hour of that from her. I turned back around. "Okay," I said. "Somebody eat those eggs before they get completely cold. We've got a wedding to get to." Priya's family is from Mississauga originally, though her parents moved to Kingston when she was 12. Her father, Rohan, is a semi-retired civil engineer. Meticulous, soft-spoken, and possessed of the kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself, but you feel everywhere. Her mother, Anita, is a force of nature in the absolute best sense. A retired secondary school principal who somehow makes everyone in her orbit feel both slightly assessed and completely loved at the same time. They had accepted me from about the 4th month of our relationship. Not in a performative way, in a real way. Rohan started including me in conversations about his garden. Anita started calling me to ask my opinion on things, not because she needed it, I think, but because she wanted me to know I was someone whose opinion mattered. Small things. Real things. The ceremony was held at a restored heritage venue about 20 minutes outside of Kingston, stone walls, tall windows, late afternoon light that Priya had specifically planned around because she is the most intentional person I have ever met. Her sister Kavya was her maid of honor. There were about 110 guests. I stood at the front and watched Priya walk toward me, and I want to tell you something. Whatever was sitting in my chest from that morning conversation, it didn't disappear, but it got very small. Because she was in this ivory dress that had just a little bit of gold thread worked through it, and her hair was up in a way I'd never seen before, and she was smiling. Not the smile she uses for photos, but the real one, the one she smiles when something catches her genuinely off guard, like pure unguarded happiness. She was walking and she was smiling that smile, and it was at me. Whatever my father had taken from the morning, she gave back just by walking through that door. We said our vows, real ones we'd written ourselves over 3 very imperfect drafts. I stumbled slightly over one line and she laughed, and then I laughed, and somehow that made the whole thing more real than anything I could have planned. When the officiant said you may kiss your partner, someone in the crowd hooped. I'm pretty sure it was Dev, and the whole room laughed. We were married. The reception was in the adjoining hall, same venue. String lights and long tables, and an absolutely irresponsible amount of food that Anita had had strong opinions about in the best possible way. The DJ was good. The bar was open. People danced who I did not expect to dance. My mother cried. My father sat at the head family table with his usual composed expression, drinking what I knew was exactly 2 glasses of scotch because he always had exactly 2 glasses at events. Natalie looked genuinely happy for us. She'd given a small toast at the rehearsal dinner the night before that made Priya laugh so hard she snorted, which Natalie still brings up as her greatest achievement. Everything on the surface was fine. The speeches started around 8 o'clock. Theo went first. And I have to tell you about Theo's speech because it matters for what comes after. Theo and I have been friends since we were 19 years old. He knows me in the particular way that only someone who has watched you become yourself really knows a person. He gave a speech that was funny in the first half, a story about me getting spectacularly lost on a hiking trip in Algonquin Park because I refused to admit the trail map wasn't to scale, and then it shifted, the way a really good speech does. And he talked about watching me fall in love with Priya, about how he'd watched me become a different version of myself. Not unrecognizable, but like a sharper, clearer version. He looked at Priya and said, "Thank you for choosing him. He picked well, but so did you." And he looked at me and said, "You're the best person I know, and I mean that." There were actual tears. Multiple tables. Kavya went next. Priya's sister. She's 26, and she has this particular gift for saying deeply true things in a completely unguarded way that hits you straight in the chest before you've had time to construct any emotional defenses. She talked about Priya growing up, about the sister she knew, driven and thoughtful, and sometimes, she said with total love, exhaustingly certain she knows best about everything, and then she talked about what she saw change when Priya met me. She said, Priya stopped trying to have everything figured out. And for her, that's enormous. She cried partway through. Priya cried. Anita cried. I was doing okay until Kavya looked at me and said, "Take care of my person," and then I was not okay. Good speeches. Real speeches. The room was warm with it. And then it was time for the parents. My mother went first, because that had been the plan from the start, both mothers, then both fathers. She stood up and she was already crying before she said a word, which was very her. She talked about me as a child, the good things, the funny things. She talked about the first time she met Priya and knew. She talked about watching us build a life together and how proud she was. It was warm and genuine and her, completely her. Then she sat down and looked at my father, and there was a small moment, I saw it, because I was watching, where she touched his arm, the way you touch someone you're prompting. My father looked at the table. He didn't stand up. Anita's husband, Rohan, who was supposed to go after my father, noticed the pause. He's a perceptive man. He gave it a few seconds, then he stood up. I want to tell you something about what happened in the next 8 minutes, because I have thought about it almost every day since. Rohan is not a man who makes grand gestures. He doesn't have a booming voice or a comedian's timing. He's the kind of man who thinks carefully before he speaks and then says exactly what he means, no more and no less, and it turns out that's its own kind of power. He started by talking about Priya, about her childhood, about the specific texture of knowing her, how she would argue with him at the dinner table from the time she was 9 years old, fully prepared, almost always right, never backing down just to make peace. He said, she didn't get that from me. She got that from her mother, and I have spent 30 years being grateful and occasionally exhausted by that fact. The room laughed. Anita said Rohan in a warning tone that made everyone laugh harder. Then he looked at me. He said, I want to talk about my son-in-law. He said son-in-law and then he paused, and then he said, actually, my son. Something happened in that room. A quality shift, like pressure changing before a storm. He said that he had watched me for 7 years. He said he'd watched how I moved through the world, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with a consistency of character that he had come to genuinely admire. He said he'd watched how I treated his daughter, not just in the good moments, but in the moments when things were hard, when life got heavy, when anybody watching would have understood if someone chose the easier path. He said, Brennan has never chosen the easy path when the right path was available. And that is not a small thing. That is, in my experience, the whole thing. He talked about the conversation we'd had about 2 years ago, just the two of us, when I had asked him formally and privately if I had his blessing to propose to Priya, even though, he acknowledged, she was a grown woman who didn't need anyone's permission for anything. She'd made that clear at 9 years old. He said I appreciated that he asked. Not because it was my decision to make, but because it told me something about who he is, someone who values the people around the ones he loves, not just the person he loves. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I am so grateful that Priya found you. And I want you to know, both of you to know, that our family is not just something Priya is bringing you into. You are someone we are choosing. Actively and completely. You belong with us. He raised his glass. To Brennan and Priya. To my son and my daughter. The room erupted. Standing ovation from at least half the tables. Priya was full-on crying, the kind where she wasn't even trying to hold it back. I wasn't doing much better. Theo behind me said quietly, "Yeah, that's the speech," which about covered it. I hugged Rohan when he sat back down. I got up from my chair and I went around the table and I hugged him, and he hugged me back with both arms, the kind of hug that means something. And in the middle of all of that, I was aware, at the edge of my awareness, of my father. Still seated. Glass of scotch. Expression that I couldn't quite read from where I was standing. I didn't make a point of watching him. I want to be honest about that. The night was too full, too good, and I was too happy to spend much of it monitoring my father's reaction to things. Priya and I danced. We talked to guests. I ate the most genuinely excellent butter chicken I have ever had in my life and made a point of telling Anita, who told me she'd been on the phone with the caterer about it for 6 weeks. But there were moments. Toward the end of the night, maybe around 10:30, I was coming back from the bar and I passed near my father's table. He was sitting with my Uncle Warren and Warren's wife, but he wasn't really in the conversation. He was looking at something or looking at nothing. The kind of look people get when they're somewhere else in their head. On the way back to our table, my mother caught my arm gently. "Rohan's speech was beautiful," she said. "It was," I said. She looked at me in the way she has looked at me my whole life when she wants to say something she doesn't quite know how to say. Her mouth opened, then closed. "Your father," she started. "Mom," I said. Gently, but clearly. "It's okay. It's a good night. Can we just let it be a good night?" She nodded. Squeezed my hand. "Let me go." Natalie found me later, near the end of the reception when people were starting to drift toward the exits. She'd had a couple of glasses of wine, and she gets softer when she's had a couple glasses of wine. The sharpness that she normally carries goes quiet, and you see what's underneath, which is actually someone who cares a lot about things. "Rohan's toast was something else," she said. "Yeah." She looked at me for a second. "Bren." "I'm good, Nat." "I know you're good. You're always good." She said it without sarcasm, which surprised me. I'm sorry." "Okay. I don't know exactly what for, but I'm sorry." I put my arm around her shoulders. "Don't be. It's a good night." "It is," she agreed. And then she hugged me properly, the kind of hug we hadn't given each other in probably 10 years. "She's incredible, by the way. Priya. You did really well." "She did really well," I said. "She picked me." Natalie laughed. "Yeah, she did. Questionable judgment, but a good heart." 3 days later, Priya and I were in Tofino for our honeymoon. We'd rented a small house right on the water, and on the third morning I was standing on the deck with coffee, watching the Pacific do its thing, and my phone rang. It was my father. I almost didn't answer. Not out of anger, I want to be clear about that, but because I was on my honeymoon and the ocean was doing something remarkable with the light, and some conversations can wait. But I answered. "Hey, Dad." "Brennan." A pause. "Do you have a minute?" "I'm on my honeymoon," I said. Not unkindly. Just factually. "I know. This won't take long." I sat down in the deck chair and waited. He was quiet for a moment in that way he gets when he's working out how to say something. My father is not an emotionally avoidant man exactly. He just moves slowly through that territory, like someone picking their way across ground they're not sure will hold their weight. "The speech Rohan gave," he said finally. "Yeah," I said. Another pause. "It was well done." "It was," I agreed. Silence. I could hear the ocean below me and some kind of bird I couldn't identify. "I've been thinking," he said. "About the morning." What I said. I kept my voice even. "What about it?" "I don't," he stopped. Started again. "I think maybe I said it wrong." I thought about that for a moment. About all the things maybe I said it wrong could mean and couldn't mean. "What did you mean to say, Dad?" A long pause. I don't know that I had a better version worked out. That was honest. I'll give him that. "Okay," I said. I was going to say, he stopped again. I had something written. I don't know why I made the decision I made that morning. In the room. I think I was, he went quiet. I don't know what I was. I sat with the ocean for a second. Dad, I said. I'm not angry at you. I genuinely mean that. I'm not saying it to close the conversation down. But I don't think this is the call you need to be having right now on day 3 of my honeymoon. No, he admitted. You're right. When we're home, I said. When things have settled. We can talk properly. Okay. Okay, he said. I thought he was going to hang up, but he didn't. There was a long pause where I could hear him breathing, and I wasn't sure what was coming. He said, Rohan called you his son. It wasn't a question. He did, I said. Another pause. Good, my father said, quietly. That's good. You deserve that. And he hung up. I sat there for a long time after that, holding the phone. The ocean kept doing its thing. The bird I couldn't identify called from somewhere down the beach. You deserve that. I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me felt something soften toward him, because I could hear, under the surface of that call, something working in him. Something shifting. A man who doesn't move easily through emotional territory trying to find his footing on ground he'd let go to seed for 30 years. Another part of me. The part that remembered the hotel room, the pressed shirt, the look of relief on his face when I told him it was fine, that part of me thought, one phone call doesn't rebuild what 30 years built. And both of those things were true at once. We came home from Tofino and life picked up the way life does. The administrative enormity of merging 2 households, 2 schedules, 2 sets of deeply entrenched opinions about how a refrigerator should be organized. I am right, for the record, and Priya has come to accept this. Work. Friends. The good ordinary weight of a shared life. My father and I had dinner about 6 weeks after we got back. Just the 2 of us, at a restaurant downtown that he chose, a steakhouse, of course, it's always a steakhouse. He arrived before me, which is like him, and was already at the table when I got there. We talked about work first, because that's always first with him. Then about the house Priya and I were thinking about buying. Then about Natalie, her relationship, her career. The usual ground. About halfway through the main course, he set down his fork. I had a speech prepared, he said. I looked at him. Written out. 3 pages. I'd worked on it for about 2 months. He turned his wine glass slowly. I don't know why I made the decision I made that morning. I've thought about it a lot, and I don't have an answer that fully satisfies me. I waited. I think he picked his words slowly. I think I've always found it harder with you. That wasn't what I expected him to say. Harder how? I asked. You were always, he paused. You never needed anything from me. Or you didn't seem to. Natalie has always needed, she's always been expressive about it, what she wants, what she needs. You handled things. You were capable. And I think somewhere along the way I started reading that as you not wanting it, rather than just being better at not showing it. I sat with that for a while. Dad, I said. I wanted it. I know, he said. He didn't look away, which cost him something I could tell. I know that now. I think I've known it longer than I've admitted. Watching Rohan get up and give that speech, he stopped. It put something in front of me that I'd rather not have had put in front of me. Which is what? He was quiet for a moment. That someone else was paying attention in the ways I should have been paying attention. And he wasn't doing it to make a point. He was that's who he is. He sees you and he says it. I didn't have an easy response to that. The honest truth is there was anger still in me, somewhere below the surface. Not the hot kind, but the long-settled kind, the kind that comes from decades of small recalibrations downward. That kind doesn't vanish over a steak dinner. It doesn't vanish because someone finally articulates what they did wrong. But I also looked at my father, 63 years old, a man who grew up in a place and a time that did not teach men to move easily through this territory, and I saw someone trying. Not perfectly. Not without being pushed to it by a moment he hadn't controlled. But trying. I appreciate you saying that, I said. And I meant it, even if it wasn't the whole story. I have the speech, he said. If you ever, I don't know. Your anniversary, maybe. If you'd want to hear it. I looked at him for a second. Keep it for something, I said. We'll figure out when. He nodded. Picked his fork back up. We finished dinner. Talked about hockey, because after all of that we apparently both needed to talk about hockey. I paid because he always pays and I wanted to do something different. He didn't argue about it, which was its own kind of shift. About 14 months after our wedding, Natalie's boyfriend proposed. His name is Felix. He's a genuinely good guy, an environmental lawyer, a bit awkward in the best way, absolutely devoted to Natalie in a way that I think is exactly what she needs. When she called to tell me the news, I could hear it in her voice. That particular quality of happiness that doesn't quite believe itself yet. "I'm so happy for you, Nat," I said. "Yeah," she said. And then, quieter, "Bren, I need to talk to you about something." "What's up?" "Dad is," she paused. "He's already talking about his speech." "Already?" "They've been engaged for 48 hours and he's already," she stopped again. "I feel weird about it. I keep thinking about the morning of your wedding, what he said to you." "Felix told me and I—" "Theo told you," I said. I wasn't angry at Theo for that. "Yeah." A pause. "I just want you to know that I didn't ask for that. I would never ask for that. And whatever he says at our wedding, whatever he prepared, I want you to know that I know, and I'm sorry, and—" "Natalie," I said. "Stop. You have nothing to be sorry for." "I know, but—" "Listen to me. You getting everything you deserve on your wedding day does not take anything from mine." "Okay. Those aren't competing things. Be happy. Let Dad give his speech. Accept all of it. You deserve all of it." There was a silence on the line, and then she made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else. "You're really something, you know that," she said. "Don't tell anyone," I said. "It'll ruin my brand." She laughed properly at that. Our first anniversary, Rohan and Anita came to Kingston to celebrate with us. Priya cooked. She'd spent a week planning the menu, which I was informed I had no input on, which was accurate because I would have suggested pasta and called it done. We ate at our dining room table and drank good wine and talked for about 4 hours. At some point after dinner, when Priya and her mother had migrated to the living room and were deep in a conversation I couldn't follow, but that seemed to involve a lot of laughing, Rohan, and I ended up in the kitchen doing dishes. He's the kind of person who doesn't need a reason to do dishes. He just does them. Another thing I've noticed about him. We were quiet for a few minutes in the comfortable way of people who don't need to fill silence. Then he said, without looking up from the sink, "How are things with your father?" I thought about it honestly, which he deserved. "Better," I said. Slowly. "But better." He nodded. "Good. The speech you gave," I said. "It mattered. Not just to me, I think it moved something in him." Rohan turned off the water and dried his hands. "I wasn't trying to move something in him," he said simply. "I was just trying to tell the truth about you." I didn't know what to say to that. "The truth about you," he said, "is easy to tell." "That helps." He handed me the dish towel and went to join the women in the living room. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, holding the dish towel, listening to Priya's laughter from the other room. I thought about the hotel suite. The gold light. The untouched eggs. The 30 seconds at the window where I'd let myself feel the full weight of what my father had said, and then chose to put it away. I thought about the ocean in Tofino, and "You deserve that" in my father's voice. I thought about Natalie saying, "You're really something, you know that." And I thought about this. About standing in my own kitchen in my own home with my wife's laughter in the next room and a man in the living room who had stood up at my wedding and called me his son. Chosen me. Actively and completely. My father had spent 30 years loving me in the language he had. Maybe now he was trying to learn a few new words. And Rohan had just loved me in the language that mattered. I don't know that I've fully reconciled those two things. I'm not sure reconciling them is the point. Some things don't resolve into clean conclusions. Some things you just carry and learn to carry better over time. But standing in that kitchen, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel very easily for most of my life. I felt chosen. And it turned out that was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, the whole thing. My father gave his speech at Natalie's wedding. I was there. I heard it. It was good. Genuinely good. He talked about watching Natalie grow up, about the pride he felt, about Felix and what he saw in him. He cried a little, which I had never seen before, and Natalie cried a lot, and my mother held his hand the whole time. After the speech, he walked over to where I was standing near the back of the room. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I have something for you. When you want it." I knew what he meant. "Yeah," I said. "I know." He put his hand on my shoulder. Not the single squeeze from the hotel room, but something that lasted a few seconds longer, something that didn't rush itself. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I should say that more." "You can start whenever you want," I told him. And he nodded. And we stood there together for a moment and watched Natalie dance with Felix in the gold light of her wedding, and I thought, okay, this is something. This is not everything. But it's something, and it's real, and that's worth holding on to. Priya found me a few minutes later, took my hand, leaned her head on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. And I meant it, all the way down. "Yeah, I really am." She squeezed my hand. "We want to dance."